Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to chair this session. So first, let me introduce our speaker today. So let me briefly introduce Professor Nguyen. So he's a lecturer in English language at the Hue University, and he earned his PhD at school education, the University of Queensland. And his research interests include language teaching in third world context, global policy in foreign language education, and social aspects of language testing. And he's currently head of the English Department and Academic Affairs of the Hue University College of Foreign Language in Hue City, Vietnam. Okay. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Nguyen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I consider myself not as an expert on the CEFR, though. I mean, there might be a lot of people interested in the CEFR, and a lot of research has been done in Vietnam context, and I happen to be one of them. So today I'm very happy to be risked and invited to the conference so that I can share some of my opinions, some of my research findings that I have conducted during my PhD projects. My PhD project is on the CEFR and how the policy is was played out in Vietnam context. And during the time of conducting this research project, we were in a kind of a very sensitive period of implementing the policy. There were a lot of anxiety and concerns and debates and a lot of questions in mind. And so I decided to focus on this research, and I tried to understand how the CEFR was adapted in Vietnam. I agree with Professor Tonos when he said that there are three types of the CEFR as a global language policy. It could be adoption, adaptation, and creation. And in the case of Vietnam, I think it's also, I don't know if it belongs to which type of borrowing, or it could be partial adoption. I think it doesn't fit well into the adoption type. Would be that kind of partial adoption. I will clarify that. One of the things caught my attention is that this comment from Reynolds, when they say that the impact of the CEFR together with the companion volume has grown to previously wholly unforeseeable levels. And it is in Asia that the CEFR has found its most adherent followers, and the impact and influence is likely to increase, especially in Asia. So that is interesting. Why in Asia? Why we have a lot of adherent followers here in Asia? I know that the CEFR has been borrowed and implemented in different polities, different places and countries, both inside Europe and outside Europe. But the question is that in the context of some countries, like in Vietnam, is it just a happenstance? I borrow this word from Byron Papenta in their book in 2012. They say some of the encounters with the CEFR is maybe it's just by chance. Somebody knows the CEFR and they introduce the CEFR to the policymakers. We don't know. There might be a lack of systematic introduction and understanding of the CEFR before it was borrowed in one specific context. I think that might be the case in some contexts, like in Vietnam, for example. But then we know the CEFR through a project. And the project is called Project 2020. Later, it is known as the National Foreign Language Project in Vietnam. This is a very big project, and it's aimed to enhance the foreign language proficiency levels of Vietnamese people, especially English. The CEFR was introduced in this project, and in 2008. And after that, 6 years later, a local version, I would use the word CEFR-V, but I'm not sure that it could be a local framework or not. It could be a kind of a partial adoption, as I mentioned. The global reference levels were adopted, as some global descriptors were adopted and translated into Vietnamese, but it was not adapted, it's not borrowed in its entirety. It's not borrowed the CFR as a 254-page document. So in 2014, we have a policy to issue the local version of the CFR in Vietnam. And in 2015, we have an effort to increase the influence of the local framework by using a testing mechanism called Vietnamese Standardized Test of English, or VSTEP, are now used to categorize learners into different level of proficiencies using the common reference levels of the CFR. So that the policy also mandates that all school leavers will have to reach a minimal level of English proficiency based on the CFR reference levels. And all eligible teachers have to reach, or should reach, I wouldn't say the word have to, but should reach a minimal level of English proficiency in order to be able to teach students at a particular level of proficiency. Usually teachers are required to be 2 levels higher than their students. For example, if you want to teach the students at level 1 or A1 of CFR, then the teachers would have to be at sometime able to attain the level of B2, for example. In this presentation, I'm not going to look into the situation or the impact or the current assessment, evaluation of the CFR implementation in Vietnam, but I'm trying to look at the social-cultural context that precedes the adoption of the CFR, because I think that somehow contextualized the decision to adopt the CFR in Vietnam. So it's all we try to use the documents, the governance documents, so that we can understand. I'm not sure that we can have a good understanding, but a better understanding of the decision to adopt the CFR in the Vietnam context. So I'm going to elaborate on at least 3 social-cultural conditions that contextualize the decision to adopt the CFR in Vietnam. According to our analysis and assumptions, we're trying to frame the adoption by referring to 3 conditions. First of all, the changes in the language policy related to English education in Vietnam. The second one, we talk about the need for reform or innovations in higher education sector in Vietnam. And the third one, I'm trying to look at the tendency for administrators to look outwards for solutions to domestic issues. So these are the 3 contexts, I would say. I would use the word context that underline, underline the decision to adopt the framework in Vietnam. Then in 2008, 2010, 2014, when the framework was adopted. So first of all, let's look at the table here, and I'm trying to highlight the fact that in Vietnam, the foreign language policies has been shaped by its national, the nation relationship with other countries. And you can see here there are shifts and changes happens during the course of history in Vietnam, with the Chinese and then French and Russian present in the landscape of foreign language education in Vietnam. But it's not until here, after Vietnam was trying to adopt a market-oriented economy, then the English became an important foreign language subject at all levels of education. we have 3 milestones here, and I try to highlight these 3 milestones. The first one in 1993, the government decided to issue what is called guidelines for practical English language education curriculum. And this one is one of the first significant foreign language policy in Vietnam. It categorized learners into 3 broad levels, that is elementary, intermediate, and advanced. In 1994, we also have another important policy. We call that National Strategy for Foreign Language Teaching and Learning. According to this strategy, English became an obligatory subject for universities nationwide. And then until 2008, Vietnam becomes more deeply engaged in the global economy. So we felt the need to upgrade the level of proficiencies among learners, and we decided to issue and to have this national foreign language projects, as I mentioned earlier. And that is the time when the CEFR came into place, and that is the time when the CEFR was officially introduced in the landscapes of language education in Vietnam. So this adoption of the CEFR by the National Foreign Language Project is considered to be an effort to adopt a Western model of teaching and learning to fix the problems in English language education in Vietnam. And the authority hopes that by adopting this framework, there will be a more concrete platform to initiate curricular as well as language testing reforms with higher levels of learning outcomes. And it is hoped that the resulting standard of English language competence would be higher, and it would enable young Vietnamese learners to compete for jobs in the global market. So that's one of the contexts that we believe that contextualize decision to adopt the CEFR in Vietnam at that time. The second context we would like to highlight is that the need for economic as well as political innovations and efforts to reform higher education. So in the period between 2011 and 2013, we have some sort of freshness in terms of policy making. We have an encouragement of critical debates, especially the critical debates online regarding to policy making, policy dissemination, and policy discussion. So within that context, we have the discourse of reforms across many sectors, including higher education, English language education, was highlighted. And in 2005, the government declared a reform agenda known as Higher Education Reform Agenda (HERA). It's trying to focus on the aim of adopting international standards and trying to promote global competitiveness. So the effort to adopt the CEFR in Project 2020 or the National Language Projects might be an effort to advance the aim of rigorous reform in education. And we believe that this embracement of international standards and foreign pedagogical products is one way of facing many challenges, the lack of competence in foreign languages in Vietnam at that time. So that could be another context underlying the adoption of the CEFR in Vietnam that we have observed through the governance document. And the last context, we think that there seems to be a tendency from the administrator's point of view. They tend to look outwards for solution to domestic issues. Of course, we understand that Vietnam policy in Vietnam, the kind of policy borrowing has been embedded in the history of colonialism, and we have constant influence from major foreign powers. Because of that, the Vietnamese people developed important lessons to make the most of their colonial legacies and to understand what is to retain, what is to ignore, what is to adapt. So I believe that could be one of the what is the underlying context that would somehow explain the adoption of the CFR at that time. The authority have decided to take a more proactive approach to look outwards, so that they can solve the issues of teaching and learning foreign languages in Vietnam at that time. But the thing is that the CFR is as Professor Toro has mentioned, is not a simple document. Sometimes I find it's very hard to read, to understand, and to grasp the main philosophical implications of teachings and learning in the document. So it's very sophisticated. It also subject to interpretation and reinterpretation. And this is where we believe that complication begins. So a superficial adoption of the global common reference levels, or an adoption of the CFR without further research and changes to fix in with the local context will be very hard, and it would be difficult to be successfully implemented. So that is some of the underlying context that I would like to highlight in this presentation. And of course, through that, you can see could be some of the potential challenges I will try to present to you later on. But first of all, there are good outcomes. I think that the situation in Vietnam since 2008, when CFR was first adopted, and now the situation has been better. I mean, the quality of teaching, the effort to reform the system and to boost up the efficiency of the system has been significantly improved. And because the framework has been adopted in a top-down manner, so it has been consistently done through different levels of education from the top to the bottom. And also we can see that because of the using of the high-stakes testing mechanisms, such as the VSTEP, the national, the CFR-based standardized testing that I mentioned earlier, it is used to set standards for learners, and it could generate swift and widespread influence of the CFR, or the local version of the CFR in Vietnam. It also has triggered alerts and critical awareness among key stakeholders, including teachers and students, while the framework, the local framework, and their own language performance. And in some way, this is a well-intended, deliberate message from policymakers to address the urgent issue of insufficient levels of language performance among Vietnamese learners. But the challenges are there. Some of the challenges have been mentioned and proposed by me and my team, and some of them are mentioned by some other researchers in the field in Vietnam. But then one of the things that we can observe is that there's a lot of debate among educators related to the adoption of the CFR until now. And I believe that debate is good for an informed decision-making related to the CFR, but it also shows that the controversy of the adoption, usually a top-down attempt to implement the CFR, such as in Vietnam context, it causes confusion, sometimes misconceptualizations of the CFR. This one is mentioned by Nagai and their colleagues in the publication related to the Vietnam context. Some of the scholars, researchers also mentioned the minimal level for learners based on the CFR levels are a little bit ambitious, and maybe it's not achievable for some students in some areas of the country. And because it has a lot of challenges, it seems that the adoption of the CFR is not fully considered and not really based on scientific evidence. So it could be, in some way, it could be considered as a quick fix solution. Also, without, considering its contextual constraints, it might be an abrupt, hasty decision. And since the CFR companion volume was issued, then the adoption of the CFR at that time of the decision was outdated, because now we also have the companion level volume, which I think there's significant changes related to what we call mediation and ruralism. It's also important for us to look at when we adopt the CFR framework. And also, the local frame, somehow it's aimed at all foreign languages in Vietnam, but mainly, in reality, it's mainly reduced to English education only. So some of the macro level challenges could be mentioned related to this adoption. At the micro level, classroom level, it seems that the adoption of the CFR and its common reference level is low. Its discounters have led to a kind of over dependence on the materials that are already there by some famous publishers. So it could be a kind of challenge for teachers and learners in Vietnam until now. Although we have some local CFR aligned materials published by local publishers, but still, on the whole, you can see some sort of over dependence on these ready-made materials. But we also do not have some pedagogical tools that promote learner-centeredness. We understand that CFR trying to promote the learner autonomy and learners as social agents, but it seems like the tradition of teaching foreign languages, including English in Vietnam, still one step behind. We do not have the tools, such as the portfolios, the e-portfolios, to promote the self-study and learner-centeredness in teaching. We do not have an adequate number of contact hours. It's constrained by the curriculum. There's mismatch between the assigned textbook and the CFR-aligned outcomes, low levels of student proficiency at the entry level, and also there are significantly different levels of awareness, of understanding and practice of the Vietnamese teachers of English. Of course, as Professor Tono suggested, I think for this kind of policy to be implemented successfully, there should be training, there should be somehow effective communication between the policymakers and the teachers and the learners at the micro level, classroom level, so that they can not only adopt the materials, adopt the reference levels, but adopt the philosophy underlying the teaching and the learning. Some of the, what I would like to say, ways forward, some of the considerations that might help us to move forward in Vietnam. As you know, in my own opinion, I think it's important to think about certain feasible CFR-based learning outcomes. This is somehow one of the key important aspects of adoption of the CFR, because we adopt wholesale 6 levels of proficiency, where I know in some contexts they're trying to make it further in details, maybe more than 10 levels, so that there should be a more accurate ways of categorizing learners into different groups. So here, for example, I would like to use Mahanovit's citation in 2013 to say, we need to consider realistic expectations. We need to have proper planning for an implication for teacher training, curriculum development, and issues to ensure issues of equality and social justice. We also need to address the tension among local actors to decide what extent the CFR levels are international standards or whether they are local standards under a new name. This is a tension. I think this is something we need to bear in mind because, as mentioned by Nagai, it's ironically that the CFR is used for the creation of a local standard precisely because it provides a global measure. However, the more local the standard is, the less global it becomes. So it's a kind of tension for people at the site to decide to what extent it could be global, to what extent it could be global or local. The last thing I would like to mention is that we need to exercise caution in turning the CFR into what we call common Asian framework or common world framework or any kind of name you can come up. But we need to look into consolidated research-based understanding of the locality where this global framework would be enacted. with new location, new skills, new actors, new organizations. And I believe this is an important message for policymakers to consider. So that is my presentation for now. I have to leave now. I hope you can understand it. Thank you. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Professor Nguyen, for his fascinating introduction of the background and the practice of CEFR in Vietnam. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the session 3 will get started soon. The speaker is Assistant Professor Zafsky, and the moderator is Professor Zhou Wenli from Department of Foreign Languages and Literature at National Cheng Kung University. Now we leave time to Professor Zhou.
Hello everyone. I'm honored to present the speakers today. Professor Krzysztof Sawicki. Professor Sawicki is an assistant professor of linguistics in the Department of Foreign Language, Faculties of Liberal Arts from Princess of Songkhla University in Thailand. His research interests are in the fields of social linguistics, applied linguistics, critical discourse studies, and language policy. A large segment of his current work revolves around the relationship between globalization and language policy, focusing in particular on global language policy regimes and their local impact. A specific focus has been on CEFR, the topic we've been listening to the whole morning. And this line of research has led him to reflect on the paradoxes faced by English language teaching practitioners. I don't know about you, but I'm very excited to listen to the finding and result around this. I know all of you must realize how productive Professor Sawicki is, and his publication list goes on. However, since the time allotted for this section is limited. So without further ado, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone, let's welcome Professor Krzysztof Sawicki.
Hello. Thank you very much, Prof. Zhou, for that really kind introduction. And let me start also by saying thank you very much for the invitation to join this really fascinating event. Yeah, very, very grateful to be here. Okay, so yes, this is my title. So I'm speaking to you from Thailand. So Sawadee everyone. And I'll talk to you about, the challenges and the opportunities that Thailand, and also I'll talk about other contexts, have faced when working with global policy like Common European Framework. I want to just spend a few minutes talking about what is my perspective here, because I think that's quite important to say. So I'm a language policy scholar. That is my kind of main area of work. So I'm a person who studies policy, not so much a policy maker, at least not, in sitting in committees at the national level. So I should say, first of all, that, I'm not here to represent a government point of view or anything like that. I'm an observer of policy processes. Otherwise, I'm applied sociolinguist, I guess I would say these days. Yeah, so sociolinguistics is kind of where I started off. And now I sort of move more toward this applied direction. I'm also a practitioner, really, in English language teaching and testing, located in a multilingual context. So the city where I'm coming to you from, Hat Yai, I'm showing it to you here on in this map. It's maybe worth pointing out, so quite far away from Bangkok, actually. We are very close, actually, to the border with Malaysia, yeah. And there is also a lot of cultural connection with Malaysia. We have Malay-speaking community close to Hat Yai. We have also historically Chinese-speaking community in Hat Yai. So it's a quite diverse context in that sense. But of course, as you can also see, I am not Thai. Yeah, I'm obviously European. I'm originally from Slovenia. And while I've been, working in Thailand for about 8.5 years now, before that, I was living in Europe for 27 years. So in the end, that does influence my point of view and how I look at the Common European Framework in particular. I want to give you a bit of prehistory when it comes to the Common European Framework in Thailand, or CFR, yeah? So, historically, the place of English in Thailand was, we can say, rather limited, yeah? And I am talking here about English because in Thailand, Common European Framework is an English language policy in particular. Thailand was politically not integrated in any English-speaking colonial empire, right? So English was always kind of that stereotypical foreign language. And, at the very beginnings, it was an elite language. It was for people who have intercultural contacts, yeah? Now, in recent decades, there's really been a shift toward English as a kind of primary foreign language, and even in some cases, almost seen as a kind of desired second language, yeah? From the perspective of, and very similar to the debate that you are having now in Taiwan, yeah? There have been talks about, a bilingual policy, yeah, as well in Thailand. So this also, and through this sort of shift toward this whether explicit or implicit focus on Thai as national language and English as the international language, we've seen backgrounding of other European languages which used to play a kind of role in education. So German, French, Spanish, becoming less popular, and other Asian languages sort of having limited emergence. Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Korean, these are actually languages that have culturally quite high relevance, but they are at the moment maybe still sort of segregated to, special interests. So they are elective courses, in university programs, in some schools as well, but they are not, they are nowhere near they have nowhere near the spread that English has in education now. So English is now, the primary compulsory foreign language for all students at all levels of education in Thailand, practically from preschool to university level. Yeah, and let's say the history here is coming from the perspective of searching for more effective approaches to English language education. So meaning, looking for sort of in this sort of aim to spread English to society, looking for what will make this happen. And in the background here is this sort of long-term search or attempted shift from form focus to communicative teaching, something that is really not unique to Thailand. Yeah, we can see all around Asia this sort of tension between do we go to form, do we teach grammar, or do we teach this kind of communicative, and what form of communicative. In the past, there's been in this name also adoption of new curricula. Yeah, so before CFR, there were adoption of curricular models from the US, for example, in terms of the way that language goals were set, standards-based curriculum model, that kind of thing. And of course, maybe the latest phenomenon here is the spread of CLIL, so content language integrated learning, and also EMI, English medium programs. That's sort of the latest push in particularly in basic education, going toward again promoting English. So just to give you a bit of history, right, the sort of how the CFR comes in, the sort of first real sort of policy that introduces CFR. This is coming from 2014, so it's much later than the two contexts that have already been introduced, Japan and Vietnam. So 2014 is the publication of this text that you can see here, which is CFR Manual for Teachers. And what this basically was like an introduction, but it was in many ways a translation, of the CFR into Thai according to sort of different skills and kind of mapping onto different goals, let's say, for different educational levels, and also kind of an explanation of it through the perspective of communicative language teaching, which was the approach that was being promoted at the time. Another key text the year after that was the National Education Plan, which is a 25-year sort of philosophy for education that the government adopted at the time. And this did a couple of things, but one of the things that it did is it set the desired targets for the 20-year period in five-year breaks. And I will come back to this in a further slide. Finally, after that, we also get, since I'm working in higher education, we also get a policy to require the use of CEFR in higher education institutions, which is basically it's framed as a bigger policy guidelines to improve English in higher education. But let's say one of the provisions at the very end is that standardized English language tests must be administered and that these have to be aligned to the Common European Framework or other standards, it says here. But seeing that the Common European Framework was basically compulsory or interpreted as being compulsory in this sense. So this is kind of the timeline. It's a little bit, starting a little bit from the bottom or from the mid-scale, and then going to the top and then sort of going back to the bottom. And that is, let's say, maybe just the messiness or of normal policy, I would say. Now, I will talk about kind of three directions of policy making in the way that CEFR has been used in the Thai context. So I'll talk about the use in policy for strategic goal setting. I'll talk about the use in testing, which is development of new assessment mechanism. And then I'll talk about use in teaching, which is its impact on classroom practice. And here I already put a question mark, so it's something that you can imagine what I'll be saying there. Now, when it comes to policy, the sort of main use of CEFR at the moment has been at the national level to specify expected proficiency targets for English. And you can see these on the right here. So these were the targets that were originally set. So A1 at the end of primary school, A2 in the third grade of secondary school, and then B1 in the final grade of secondary school. So that's sixth grade of secondary school, and also at bachelor's degree level, so undergraduate study. So B1 sort of after high school or bachelor's degree study was kind of the expectation that was set for the education system. And this was, and going beyond the national level, it's also been quite widely used by universities. And I'll come back to this. It's really at the university level where CEFR has had the most impact in the Thai context. Now, I should note here, and the previous speakers have also pointed this out, that of course CEFR is a lot more than the levels. There is these levels are kind of the most visible part, but there is a philosophy behind it. There is also a kind of way of teaching that is probably implied in these levels. And that kind of thing has seen a little bit less uptake. So it's basically been seen as, okay, we use these levels as a kind of common target, but basically map them onto the sort of approach that has been promoted for a couple of decades already, which is communicative teaching. So that's any kind of shift in overall philosophy hasn't really happened. And perhaps maybe it was worth pointing out that since CEFR was introduced, we haven't had a new basic curriculum for English introduced. So the curriculum is still from 2006, So it's and that's already was at the time, and it's still quite a progressive curriculum, which is stressing communication, culture, comparison, connection with other fields of study. So it is really actually there is a kind of profound compatibility with CEFR, but there hasn't been any attempt to map the two that I'm aware of. There is sort of this focus, let's say, especially on the levels, that's sort of the main thing. And here, I would sort of point out a little bit, as Prof. Tso mentioned, I am a discourse analyst as well. So I do sort of look at how is the CEFR talked about in these documents. And the sort of way that it's framed is often a little bit problematic from my perspective. Here I'm assessing, obviously. In the sense that the one thing is the goal setting itself is already driven by these discourses of development, of competitiveness that we often see in education, right? Where, policymakers look at other contexts and basically, set goals because this other context that we aspire to be like set this goal, and therefore we are going to set the same goal. So on this slide, right, you can see the way that the CEFR is being actually juxtaposed with PISA. So PISA is this international literacy framework, that is sort of used basically to evaluate the success of education frameworks. And you can see basically, so for the 5-year periods that this education plan covers, right, the plan basically anticipates a kind of gradual increase of PISA scores, right? And when you look at the CEFR level, so at the beginning we have the targets that I showed before. So A1 for primary school, A2 for sort of middle of secondary school, and then B2 even here for kind of end of education, end of higher education. And basically then, it follows the model of the PISA scores where it's basically seen as, okay, we are going to have an increase of English proficiency within the same period. And this is, basically following this the kind of anxiety that exists in discourse around education, very similar to what happens around PISA. Whenever the score comes out, it kind of, in many contexts, triggers this kind of panic, right? And we have actually very similar kind of features in the around English also in Thailand, where, when comparisons of English proficiency come out on a yearly basis, you will have a lot of media coverage saying, why is English proficiency so poor? What's wrong with our education system? That sort of thing. Based on this idea that, well, we should be, targeting the same levels as we see in, Sweden or Singapore, successful education system, like in more developed nations. But of course, this all has a very questionable sociolinguistic basis, because compared to those contexts where English proficiency at the exit of high school maybe is B2 sort of nationwide, right? The presence of English in Thai public sphere, in the cultural life of Thai, the average Thai high school student is much lower. Especially when we go out of big cities like Bangkok, when we go out of tourist areas like Phuket, the presence of English is much, much lower, is in many cases near zero. And the actual achievement, of course, is much below even the targets that are set for now. I mean, the majority of students at our university will come at, level A1, A2 to university level after 12 years of compulsory English education. So there is a kind of split here between aspiration and reality that sort of CEFR is kind of entangled with in not only the Thai context. I've done research on the Malaysian context, and there are similarities between the two. Just pointing out, right, that's, following this, actually now the authorities have also revised targets. So this policy that you see here is all in Thai, but if I translate, right, it's basically from this year, they published these new targets where, okay, if you are doing associate's degree, you should target B1. If you're doing bachelor's degree, you should graduate with B2, bachelor's degree in any field. So engineering, natural science, whatever, Thai language, even graduate degree C1. And this is the sociolinguistic basis, of course, for this is very questionable. I mean, if we look at the sort of history of CEFR, B1 is supposed to be, I can go live and perform basic functions of life in a society where this L2 is being used as dominant language. B2 is, I can study an undergraduate degree in, English, for example, if my level is English. That is kind of seen as the minimum for university student mobility. The rationalization for these targets is kind of lacking, right? Why? Not to mention, of course, how. But just pointing out why we should target these is kind of where problems are, where problems sort of emerge. When it comes to testing, is probably arguably where the impact of CFR in Thailand has been greatest. So this is in the development of local admission and exit tests at universities. So just to give you a context for, in Thai context, for university admission at undergraduate level, there are sort of nationally administered exams that are available. But then when it comes to graduation requirements, like the one that I just pointed out to you, there is no, graduate exam that everyone would have to use. And also for postgraduate admissions, MA, PhD, right? There's no national mandate that you must use this test or that test, yeah? So you basically, institutions are free to choose whether they want to use local or international tests like TOEFL, ITP, and IBT, IELTS, TOEIC, these can be used. But of course, local tests are very often preferred because they are much cheaper for students, yeah? So, if you take a locally developed test, it might be, a quarter of the cost of doing IELTS, for example. So because of that, they are quite popular. And of course, this creates quite significant space for local agency because you see a lot of tests being developed in-house, yeah? So university staff, lecturers at, for example, my department, end up having quite a central role in interpreting CFR because they end up being tasked with, develop a test which will cover this many levels in order for us to be able to use it for admission at graduate level or for, graduating students at bachelor's degree level as well. So here there's quite a lot of, there's probably the area where CFR has sort of filtered through to the bottom of the, let's say, to the level of practitioners the most. So I'll just give you an example from my university. So we use a range of tests. As long as they are aligned to the framework, they can be used. But most notably, we have our own test called PSU TEPS, which TEPS stand here for Test of English Proficiency. And I'm actually part of the development team. So here, it's an example of where, once this CFR policy came in, we really had to redevelop this test quite holistically. It wasn't a question of taking the old test and basically doing an alignment study, right? In this case, we actually recreated the test from scratch to align to A1 to B2 range because that was the policy orientation at the time. So we sort of reduced it to just 4 levels. And as part of that, we, the main thing was to move away from form-focused items. So previously there was a lot of focus on grammar. There was a lot of quite focus on linguistic knowledge, and then focus more on local and global comprehension in listening and reading. For practical reasons, that component of the test ended up still being multiple choice, but we try to push it more toward really different types of comprehension, information processing, that sort of thing. And but then finally also the revised form of the PSU TEP also includes integrated listening and speaking and reading and writing components. Yeah, so one of the modules or 2 of the modules that you can take listening and speaking, you can take reading and writing. And these are really directly developed from the interaction scales that are contained in the framework. That's in our case, that was quite a holistic review. At other universities, maybe there's been a tendency to work from the tests that were already there and to design, to maybe reevaluate them a little bit, or to simply also do an alignment study, basically using CFR as a kind of fixed scale of language proficiency, which, something that we can maybe discuss later, whether that's feasible or not. Now, as far as teaching goes, this is probably where CFR has had a lot less impact in day-to-day practice, especially outside higher education. And here there's a range of factors. There's probably an already existing level of alienation between policy and practice. It's been termed reform fatigue, because in the past there's been a tendency for, when new governments come in, a new education policy will be launched, right, with big fanfare. But then when it actually comes to follow through, by that point maybe the minister has changed, maybe the high level administrators have been moved around in the Ministry of Education, and that follow through then maybe doesn't quite happen as systematically as one would have wanted. So teachers are kind of already used to this constantly incoming announcements of, we are going to change this, we're going to change that, and kind of develop a sort of resistance to that, sort of as part of almost their professional identity. Yeah. There is also a kind of documented issue where many teachers lack instructional competence for delivering communicative lessons. And whether, communicative in very sort of narrow sense that we see it now, as it's articulated in global textbooks, or if we think of communicative, in bigger sense, task-based learning, that kind of thing. All that kind of, that's a documented issue that very often teachers struggle with the idea of designing lessons. And in here, really, there is a kind of gap that still needs to be addressed even after quite a long time. This is something that's been written about in the literature for quite a while. Probably, and this is another point for discussion, is that CEFR itself is quite unsuitable, I think, for practitioner readers outside higher education, people who are teaching 25, 30 hours a week, who, don't have time to engage with that huge document. It's in my understanding or my perspective, it does suffer from a little bit of a deficit in that sense. So there is really a need to think about how to communicate it better. Another issue is at all levels, reliance on global textbooks or sometimes local textbooks or adapted textbooks as authoritative representation of curriculum policy or CEFR. So in the sense that, if the learning target is B2, you simply choose a textbook which correspond to B2 and follow whatever is in it. Yeah. That sort of is an issue that really very often practitioners' contact with CEFR is kind of secondary. Yeah, that really what they are looking at is curriculum targets, policy targets, and then looking at textbooks that are claimed to be aligned to the framework, right? And basically using those as, okay, this means I am conforming to the curriculum goals or the text or the policy goals or let's say local policy goals or whatever. There's also, of course, a kind of further issue with this disconnect, which is that partly, the alienation that teachers might have to CEFR is the way that it was introduced was a little bit unfortunate, which is through nationwide compulsory testing of teachers, kind of coming as part of this discourse of, teacher proficiency in language is low, therefore we must, we have to test them, and then we have to give them almost like remedial activities to be able to teach properly. And the resulting perception basically was that CEFR is basically just a test. Yeah. And in some cases, looking at some of the research that you can see cited here, actually there is a test where that C at the beginning stands for Cambridge. Yeah. The results of this testing, by the way, also show that there is quite a significant challenge. So you can see in the slide here, big majority below B1, which is, kind of, you would think kind of the minimum for let's say, really flexible communicative teaching, right? And a vast majority, 93 to 94% below B2, which is actually the official requirement that was stated at the time. And this is quite, a sobering picture to see, and it shows really the disconnect between, again, right, the policy targets and the sociolinguistic concept. Yeah, this is not because, these are lazy teachers or whatever. This is because sociolinguistically English does not play the role a significant role in their in the context around these people. Yeah, that's the reality. Yeah. So I'll finish the last 10 minutes. I'll talk about what are the areas that also need further attention, and sort of suggest a couple of things where applied linguistics can sort of help, and also teacher education can kind of help move the way that we use CFR on. I'll talk about two problems in particular, which is the lack of holistic focus on philosophy when we're using CFR. So the tendency to adapt it to fit existing concepts rather than rethinking them. And I should say here, I do of course believe that we have to adapt CFR, and I will talk about that too. But of course, it should serve as a kind of vehicle for some kind of holistic changes as well. Yeah. And the other problem I'll talk about is the split between theory and policy and practice on the other hand. So how we can, try to resolve this ongoing alienation between official discourse and realities of teaching and learning. So when we talk about the philosophy behind CFR, right, it's now originally, looking at that original document, there was a lot of information already there. And this has sort of continued to be developed in recent years. The sort of particularly the name that is being given to this, if you look at this book by Enrica Picardo and Brian Nortz, who are the main authors of the CFR companion volume, they talk about CFR being as part of the action-oriented approach. Yeah, and when they talk about the action-oriented approach in this book, they talk about it as oriented toward or underpinned by things like task-based language teaching, focus on authenticity, focus on autonomy, learner collaboration, but really also, not only classroom-based, but which somehow correspond to actions that you are performing in real life outside of the classroom. This is where probably there is quite a continuing deficit, and not really only in Thailand. Yeah, it would be unfair to say that this is only a Thai problem. This is really a bit of a worldwide issue, yeah, where we tend to see the CFR as a kind of generic assessment or goal-setting framework that is basically a universal scale for language proficiency from 0 to 100, right? Where still, even today, I think people interpret the top as, okay, this is native speaker proficiency, even though the type of literacy that we see at C2 level far exceeds the kind of literacy that your average British or American or whatever speaker of English does in their life. Yeah, there's a vastly broader and much more specialized scope. And aside from that, also, just thinking about what is the context of these levels, right? This is really quite a significant issue. So very often they are seen, okay, well, we just take these levels and, plug them into the communicative language teaching model that we've been promoting for the last 20, 30 years. Even in some cases, form-focused approaches get justified. So even, it's possible to find tests which are basically, where you have grammar components that claim to be, okay, well, we're doing, 30 items of grammar, vocabulary, and reading comprehension, and this is mapped to CFR from A1 to C2. Those kind of examples can even be found. So here, there's a need to have a kind of reflective approach to the framework. Yeah, the heritage of how the CFR was introduced in Southeast Asia, certainly in Thailand, also in Malaysia. The way that it arrived here was not through, let's say, applied linguistics research. It was not through starting with teacher education or teacher training. It was very much through commercial textbooks, commercial tests, Cambridge textbooks or Oxford University Press textbooks, and IELTS, TOEFL. Yeah, that was how the CFR entered here. So it's very much seen as, we must adapt to the model that comes from those textbooks and tests. And of course, there is also an underlying issue of how do you create authenticity? If the presence of English in the Thai language ecology is so low, and this is, not only again a problem of Thailand, but also of other ecologies in Asia where, we are using CFR for English, does that mean that, whatever we're doing in the classroom is by default inauthentic? Because in the end, our learners aren't doing that in English, right? So how do we then establish some kind of sense of authenticity? This is quite a challenging issue. So I would just point out, right, one of the areas where you can see this lack of reflection is how people talk about 4 skills. So, the 4 skills of CFR are reception, production, interaction, mediation, yeah? But actually, when it comes to the way that these skills are presented often can be very different. So there might be, placement tests which include grammar, right? There might be exams that talk about writing, but actually what it is error identification, so you have a sentence and you have to identify where the error has happened, something like that. So in the end, there's quite a lot of a gap here. So this is where we really need to be developing, really need to be exploring new paths, right? For developing, for targeting interaction competence, for example, as we did at PSU, is something that we need to do also for mediation, especially plurilingual mediation. Yeah, that's the sort of aspiration of mine to try and integrate that into the test. But of course, we need to think about how we can focus more on authenticity. How we can embrace a much more ambitious task-based approach as opposed to these soft versions of communicative teaching that we see often in textbooks. Just going back to this second issue, which is the lack of reflection on plurilingualism and pluriculturalism, what these actually are supposed to mean. So actually from the 2020 companion volume, these are now very explicitly operationalized. But we seem to be operating on the assumption worldwide, not just in Thailand, but also when it comes to IELTS, when it comes to textbooks, that, we don't know what to do with that plurilingualism. So we don't really have, we don't really have anything to do with it. So we do need to think about this, in the end, this comes from very significant policy concern that Prof. Tono already mentioned at the beginning, which is, in Europe, this focus on integration, So in Europe, this is expressed nowadays in the policy of teaching L1 plus 2 others, right? So proficiency in the first language and 2 other languages, that is the European Union learning goal. But of course, in Asia, we really need to think about how we can sort of grow, how we can help this kind of integration, because it is happening in the end, right? We are sort of becoming closer. There is more migration happening. And we really do need to think about how we can equip citizens to participate in integration. Do we, by necessity, need to focus only on English as a lingua franca, or do we need to think beyond English? Do we need to sacrifice all other languages and, focus on this bilingual agenda that we see throughout the continent now? Or can we use them in a kind of beneficial way? Yeah. And aside from that, do we need to think beyond, a single form of English and think about diversity of English? These are big questions that we need to answer in relation to the way that we also use CFR. So we just need to think, how can we introduce more agency to try and address this split between theory and practice? We need to think about how we can use it as a vehicle for practitioner agency, right? How we can work within the professional culture and practical constraints. But really the precondition is we need to think as a sociolinguist here, I'm talking, about how do we need to relocalize this policy for English language education in Asia? So context for CFR in Europe is, I am a Slovenian going to Austria, Germany, or Switzerland, and I'm going to use German there. So I'm using my L2 in that L2 dominant society, right? But in Asia, what we're talking about is I'm going to be using the L2 in an L3 dominant society. So I'm, a Thai person going to Taiwan, and I'm going to use English there as a lingua franca. That is a very different learning goal, and we do need to think about what other skills are not covered by the CFR that we need to target. In addition, we can also complicate it by saying that English in some Asian societies is a local language. In Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, but in different form and described in CFR. Yeah, so the kind of language use that we see described in that framework doesn't really match the uses of English as a local language in those contexts. So that's another challenge that we need to where we need to think about the future. So okay, 3 key takeaways. It's not a standard for evaluating development, even though it's often interpreted that way. We need to find ways of integrating it in practice, not only in objective setting, if it's to have an impact. And this, I think all other speakers have said this. And we need to use it as a starting point to explore new approaches, not only to reinforce old ones. That would be sort of the 3 key takeaways that I hope you will get from the talk.
Thank you, Professor Sofsky. Very insightful speech. We are now waiting for invite questions from the participants. I guess while waiting for their writing, can I take the liberty of asking the first questions? Yeah, well, basically, I'm interested to your takeaway, and I'm thinking about to conclude the morning sections. If you have to pick to localize the European framework, CEFR, to the local context and adopt it and create another one, so for example, like CEFR, Taiwan, and the other will be coming, inspiration coming from your talk, and instead of adopting or creating a new one, maybe the changing of the philosophy of language teaching, meaning redesign the national curriculum for English language teaching. So I'm asking, you which one, if you have to pick, which one would you suggest us to go first? Thank you.
Well, thank you. One thing that I didn't mention is that in Thailand, we also have localized framework based on CFR. And it kind of tried to implement some of these ideas. But the problem there was, and I think this is the general difficulty with localized versions of CFR, is that it's hard to imbue them with the same level of authority that people attach to CFR originally. So like looking at that, I have to say 5 years ago, I would have said, yes, make, CFR Taiwan. Yeah. But my sense now is probably we're better off because if the main reason for having CFR is because it's, has this international comparability, right? That we can, connect targets, this kind of thing. Maybe, having a kind of companion to the companion, yeah, would be the way to go, where it's basically, okay, this is how we are going to interpret it, yeah? This is what we're going to think of in addition. This is what we're going to ignore or shift, right? And that is going to be our sort of localized, let's say, interpretation manual or however it would be called. In the end, you get the benefit there of, okay, you're using CFR and you can map back to those to the levels that are used internationally, but at the same time you can use them internally. Yeah. So I think, and of course that kind of guide can then serve as the basis for adaptation, for curriculum development. Yeah, to set curriculum targets.
Interesting. Localized companion guide for designing national curriculum guideline.
Yes, that's
Yeah. Would you take a look at the chat room? I think there's a questions for you.
Yes, I've got the question here. So could you elaborate how it was aligned to the CFR, whether teachers achieve training before participating? Yes. So let's say in our case, we have quite a small team. It's only 4 of us working, and the head of the team is the language testing expert, right? Who had previously done research on language education, or on language testing, excuse me. So actually her previous project had been to develop integrated tasks, and she then basically was able to carry on that expertise into the development of the PSU TEP, So let's say the solution was for us, we all have to learn. I mean, for me as a sociolinguist and kind of at that time looking from CFR from the outside, actually, of course, it was a huge huge learning experience, to work with that. And it was challenging because in the end, the CFR's advantage and disadvantage is vagueness. That in the end, they are quite broad things, and you really do need to think when it says, can read the text on everyday matters, you really do need to think, what does that mean? And then what kind of language, what kind of question you need to ask. So there is a lot of expertise, a lot of contextual knowledge that needs to come in order to make it feasible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we have 1 minute remains. Professor Sofsky, enough for one more question. So you want to give us some suggestions for, the possible implementations or possible adaptations of CEFR in Taiwan?
I think that, if there's a space for applied linguistics expertise to play a role in that interpretation process, that's really you can see from Tono's presentation that in Japan, that really made a difference, that in the end, there is a sustained participation of experts in the way that is being interpreted and used, and also kind of agentive participation, not simply, passive following. I think that's really the key. So to this localization.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I think it's a big issue. Actually, it's a huge issue that we need to really put a lot of thinking on it. But thank you very much for sharing your insight, comments and findings. Thank you very much. And I think
Very much, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the session 4 will get started soon. The speaker is Professor Lee. The moderator is Professor Hu Jiefeng from Department of English Instruction at University of Taipei. Now we leave time to Professor Hu.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jiefeng Hu from University of Taipei. Welcome to this session on CEFR. As many of us know, that CEFR is a common framework for documenting and assessing language proficiency for all the languages. So it is not specifically designed for the English language. It is applicable to all the languages. So that is why it is called a common framework rather than English framework. So I'm very delighted that we can have Professor Jae-Hak Lee here to be with us to broaden our understanding of using the framework as a reference for languages, right? Languages in a broader context. So Professor Lee is the chair, also the professor from the Department of Spanish at the Korean University. And his topic today is shown on the screen. It is National Foreign Language Education Policies and CEFR, English as a Second Language, and the situation of other foreign languages. I think that the point here should be situation of other foreign languages in Korea, right? Okay, so I think it's the time for me to hand over to Professor Jae-Hak Lee. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So my voice is not very good because of the cold I have. And I ask you the kind understanding. And now I begin my presentation. The Common European Framework for Languages is the product of the political will for the emerging supranational organizations, and it's intended to provide the common basis for the elaboration of language syllabuses, curriculum guidelines, examinations, textbook, etc. across Europe, as all you already know. Although it describes in a comprehensive way what language learners have to learn to do in order to use a language for communication and what knowledge and skills they have to develop so as to act effectively. It also defines the language used as action-oriented viewing. Action-oriented viewing users and learners of a language primarily as social agents that is, members of society who have tasks to accomplish in a given set of circumstances in a specific environment and within a particular field of action. Instead of selecting one specific national language as lingua franca, the Council of Europe created a new European language domain where all countries agree to accept plurilingualism and pluriculturalism, while the multilingualism refers to the knowledge of a number of languages. The plurilingualism refers to the ability to use languages for the purposes of communication and to take part in intercultural interaction, where a person viewed as a social agent has proficiency of varying degrees in several languages and experience of several cultures. Indeed, the plurilingualism is an educational value that is the basis of linguistic tolerance and an essential element of intercultural education. Therefore, the framework emphasizes the sense of identification with other Europeans and the commitment to the language learning on a lifelong basis. The Council of Europe promotes the common European policies for pluriculturalism and full languages in the European Union, which is made up of 27 countries, and the CEFR has been rapidly adopted in them, primarily due to a political agenda. Culture points out that the CEF is a fascinating case study in the way political and social agendas can impact on language testing and how language testing can be made to serve those agendas. Thus, the Association of Language Testers in Europe, called ALTE, has associated its test with the CEFR 6-level scale. For example, the El Instituto Cervantes of Spain has adapted the CEFR to the education of Spanish, and the DELE, known as Diplomas de Español como Lengua Extranjera, which were divided into 3 levels: beginner, intermediate, advanced. Before, now, it follows the criteria proposed by CEFR, like A1, A2 for beginner level, B1, B2 for intermediate level, C1, C2 for advanced level. Some European countries like Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands have passed the immigration laws that require specific CEFR level on the test to obtain a permit of residence. As elders mentioned, the CEFR is genuinely European. Indeed, it's the product of top-down political will for the emerging supranational organization, and as Bice points out, the American context is opposite. Although there are many immigrant communities with their own languages in the United States, none of these languages, including Spanish, has been able to take over the position of English as prestigious languages, especially in the educational system. I compared the European case with the United States case. Unlike the Europe, where the government-sponsored organizations such as the British Council, El Instituto Cervantes of Spain, and the Goethe Institute of Germany play an important role, the language policy making in the United States depends on the language professional organizations such as the ACTFR. The American Council on the Testing on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and the ETS, the educational teaching service, whereas the European countries promote the plurilingualism to avoid the conflicts between its members. The United States doesn't need the centralized transnational framework. We can easily remember the famous English-only movement, which is happening in the United States. And nobody can deny that English plays the unifying role in the United States. While the Council of Europe worked on the CEFR in Europe, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFR, developed the National Metric Scale of Proficiency in the Functional Use of Foreign Languages in the U.S. The ACTFR proficiency guidelines are designed to measure and to communicate foreign language proficiency. Du Jong points out that the ACTFA guidelines made two major steps forward in the foreign language education. The ACTFA guidelines broke away from the traditional education of achievement in language learning based on the number of hours spent in the classroom and enabled the profession to assess performance based on actual proficiency. Secondly, by its explicit concern for speaking proficiency, it succeeded in shifting the attention of teachers and learners from the written mode to the oral mode. The ACTFA guidelines are designed to measure learners' functional language skills in a target language. Thus, they emphasize the importance of the creative language use instead of focusing on the knowledge of phonology and structural devices of the language. To achieve its linguistic goal, the guidelines clearly mention the importance of the testing and curriculum development. Upon the ACTFA guidelines, measurable proficiency goals will form the basis for curriculum planning and classroom teaching. Students will more quickly develop a sense of accomplishment and will be able to refer to these yardsticks to measure their progress. The complex problem of articulation, the coordination of content and skills between grade and course level can also begin to address. Student evaluation and placement can be based on actual language proficiency instead of on inaccurate and relatively uninformative measures of time. The ACTFA scale is based on the teaching definitions, which have 6 levels. Working together with the ETS, we named the FSI called the Foreign Service Institute 6-level scale. So the level 0 as your novice level, level 1 as your intermediate, level 2 as your advanced, and level 3, 4, 5 as superior. What the ACTFA guidelines recently really achieved is that it made it possible for teachers to assess the language performance based on actual proficiency instead of basing on the number of hours spent in the language learning. They were produced to help language educators measure learners' functional abilities in a target language instead of merely assessing what learners know about that language, assessing what learners know about the language. Indeed, the aim of the foreign language education changed from the written mode to the oral mode, thanks to the guidelines focusing on the speaking proficiency. So the emphasis on the creative language used instead of focusing on the knowledge of phonology and structural devices of the languages. It has become the core concept of the language education. In result, the proficiency test, which measure language learners' control of a wide range of communication skills, become more important than the achievement test, which measure learners' attainment of a particular course content. Although the guidelines, the ACTFA guidelines, successfully turned people's attention on the oral proficiency in the language education, there is criticism on it. Some people point out that for many commentators, the most important failing of the ACTFA is therefore the fact that none of the scales have any empirical underpinning. The ACTFA guidelines fail to distinguish between general cognitive skills that are independent of the level of proficiency in the target language and language skills that are related to achievement in the target language. In spite of the criticism on it, especially which comes from the European scholars, the guidelines have become the basis for the teaching and testing of foreign languages in the United States. In the last decade, the ACTFA proficiency guidelines has certain influence on the secondary school English education in Korea, whereas they are primarily aimed at college students in the United States. In Korea, the responsible institute for the foreign language education policy making is Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation. We call it KICE. It develops the national curriculum and the dissemination of teaching and learning methodologies, and also publishes the foreign language education guidelines. Since Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation is a government-funded educational research institute whose purpose is to develop the curricula for elementary and secondary schools, it automatically controls various education evaluations and tests, including College Scholastic Ability Test, CSAT, known as Sunung in Korea, which is extremely important to get the college admission. The College Scholastic Ability Test, CSAT, known as Sunung in Korea, is one of the most significant events in the life of South Korean students. I think things happen in Taiwan. This high-stakes exam determines college admission and, by extension, has a profound impact on students' future careers and social mobility. CNN reported that South Korea is the country run by the small group of elite, and to be an elite, they have to graduate from certain universities and from the certain high schools. In Taiwan, the same thing happened in Taiwan. And I think all of you already know very well about this situation. Given the test importance, the CSAT influences nearly every aspect of the education system, particularly in English language education, which is a core component of the exam. One of the most significant impacts on the CSAT on English education in Korea is the heavy emphasis on test preparation. Students often begin preparing for the English section of the CSAT years in advance, with many attending after-school academies, called in Korean 학원, specifically aimed at boosting test scores. This focus on exam preparation can lead to a narrowed curriculum, where the primary goal is to excel in the test rather than to develop comprehensive language skills. Consequently, students may become proficient in the types of questions asked on the CSAT, but might struggle with real-world English communication. To solve this problem, in the last decade, the foreign language policymakers in Korea have begun to put the importance on the communicative language teaching to improve the the student real-life language performance. In result, they have realized the importance of measuring communicative competence and have intended to replace the traditional achievement test with the hybrid of achievement and proficiency test. To do that, the foreign language educator determined what students would do with the language in a given mode. The ACTFA guidelines define this given mode as 4 language functions: listening, speaking, reading, writing. And the KICE guidelines in Korea, almost the same as the ACTFA guidelines, divide it in 2 language functions: understanding for listening and reading, and expression for speaking and writing. While these guidelines define the language function which provide direction in formulating specific objectives for the language education, the CEFR guidelines divide the language performance in reception, interaction, and production. Unlike the ACTFL and the KICE guidelines, the CEFR guidelines put importance on the interaction between speakers in a given context and make language users to be able to produce their own specifications for their own language purposes. Until 2019, the students could submit TOEFL scores as part of their early admission process to enter the college, known as 수시, which allowed universities to assess applicants based on various qualifications beyond the traditional 수능 scores. However, the submission of TOEFL scores in the early admission process to the college was eventually banned, prohibited due to concerns about fairness and the increasing influence of socio-economic factors in the college admission system, because students have to spend lots of money, their families spend lots of money in Taiwan, in the private academy, to learn TOEFL and to prepare the TOEFL. What happened in 2019 in Korea? The 조국 scandal was erupted. The 조국 scandal is so famous in South Korea until now, and 조국 scandal had a significant impact on the college admission process, particularly concerning the early admission system called the 수시 in Korea. This scandal revolved around the allegation that 조국, a former justice minister, and his family manipulated various academic and extracurricular records to gain favorable admission for their children into prestigious universities. This raised public outrage, especially over perceived elitism and corruption in the education system. The controversy highlighted the problem of the 수시 admission process, which allowed universities to consider a wide range of factors such as TOEFL and AP, advanced placement scores of the United States, personal statements, extracurricular activities, internship, and other achievements. My son, when he was a high school student, he had to study for the TOEFL and he had to study for the SAT to get the better score on AP scores. These factors were seen as being necessary to manipulation, favoring students from wealthier or more connected families. The family, if it has money, they can send their son to the private academy, and their sons with the son from the wealthy family can prepare better for TOEFL and for the SAT of the United States and for the AP scores of the United States, and they can hand it these scores to enter the prestigious Korean universities before. The 조국 scandal brought to light how such advantage could be leveraged to gain admission to top universities undermining the fairness of the system. The government, in response to public concerns about inequality in the education system, aimed to create a more level playing field for college admission by prohibiting the use of external standardized tests like TOEFL in the sushi process. This policy shift was part of broader efforts to reduce the influence of private education and expensive extracurricular qualifications in admission, ensuring that the process would rely more on standardized criteria accessible to all students, regardless of their socio-economic background. So, the government banned finding the TOEFL score in the college admission process. But because of that, we have another problem called killer question. The introduction of killer question in the Sunung, CSAT, was paradoxically driven by a desire to ensure fairness and accuracy in differentiating students' abilities in a highly competitive educational environment. As Korea's college admission system became increasingly competitive, top universities needed a way to distinguish between the high-achieving students, with many students scoring similarly on standard questions. The inclusion of more difficult question, we call it killer question, was seen as a way to differentiate the very best students. Each question required advanced problem-solving skills, deep conceptual understanding, and creative thinking, making them effective for distinguishing students at the top of the academic spectrum. So, if you want to be able to answer the killer question, you have to go to the private academy, Taiwan, and it costs a lot of money. So, last year, the president of South Korea banned killer questions in the CSAT last year. If you look at this year's student test. If you read the question, what will be the answer? The journalist handed in this question, this CSAT question, to American native speakers. Even the American native high school student could not give the right answer. The purpose of the killer question is to select top-ranking students, but it created lots of problems. The president of South Korea banned killer question last year, but now we have another problem, the rise of semi-killer question. So students still have to go to private academy called Hagwon to prepare their CSAT to confront the semi-killer questions. It's never-ending story. And both TOEFL and TOEIC still hold significant importance in Korea. Some universities still accept TOEFL scores under specific circumstances of early admission process. TOEIC, on the other hand, is widely used in the South Korea job market and plays a key role in hiring decisions for many companies. Many local and multinational corporations use TOEIC scores to assess the English proficiency of job applicants, particularly for roles that require communication with international clients or colleagues. A high TOEIC score is often considered an advantage for those seeking employment, especially in industries such as business, finance, marketing, and IT. Some universities in South Korea also require TOEFL or TOEIC scores for graduation or use them to assess student readiness for the global workforce. As a result, many students take TOEIC preparation courses during their university years. In Korea, the TOEFL and the TOEIC still function as basic English proficiency tests. In this situation, the CEFR cannot be used as effective guidelines for English teaching in the secondary education in Korea. Recognize its multiculturalism and multilingualism. Europe is now promoting pluriculturalism and plurilingualism. However, the pluriculturalism has not yet been acknowledged in Korea. New roles of English have been proposed in recent years in accordance to the development of technology and globalization. As we have seen above, the CEFR is not language specific, and it requires a comparable level of proficiency from language to language. However, the status of English as an international lingua franca is very strong in Korea and is the only foreign language in Korea. In fact, the Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation named all other foreign languages except English as second foreign language. The widespread concept that English speakers can communicate with the rest of the world is still dominant in Korea, and the so-called second foreign language education in high school level has been almost disappeared in last 10 years. However, many universities in Korea have been reducing or even closing second foreign language departments, particularly for languages like German and French. This is largely due to decreasing enrollment in these programs as students gravitate towards fields perceived as having more direct career applications such as STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and medical schools. The shrinking demand for non-English foreign language expertise in the job market also plays a significant role. While the foreign language education policy makers in Korea ignore the value of the foreign language other than English, some of the European language educators, such as French and German, tend to value the achievement of the CEFR to promote the intercultural education and the multilingualism. The second foreign language educators in Korea keep asking to the policy makers that they realize the value and importance of developed foreign language in the global society. They recommend planning the foreign language education development based on plurilingualism, like CEFR. But the problem is, the question is, who will listen to them in Korea? This is the end of my presentation, and if you have any questions about my presentation, feel free to do so, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lee. You mentioned about there is a test for the Spanish test for assessing the Spanish proficiency, right? I don't know, DELE, right?
Yeah, DELE.
So do you think that the CEFR, the framework, we have the CEFR has 6 levels of proficiency, right? Do you think that that is sufficient to differentiate the learners' Spanish ability in Korean? I mean, we have a A1 and A2, B1, B2, C1,
Yes,
C2. Do you think that in Korea, when we want to document the learners' Spanish proficiency, do we need, some further or finer discrimination in terms of the 6 levels? In other words, do we need more levels? The A1?
Very good question. Yeah, I know. Yeah, before I'm a professor of Spanish at Korea University, and my department people used to require the test result of DELE. And if the student of the State Department and my university, if they, before their graduation, they have to pass at least level B1 of DELE before their graduation. But we stopped asking them to do so, and it's not their requirement anymore. Because after the graduation, all of my students wanna go to the law school or wanna join the global company like Hyundai, Samsung, LG, SK, Telecommunication, etc. Or they want to join the IT company like Naver, Kakao, etc., etc., etc. And the Spanish-speaking proficiency is not that important for them. Even I send interns to Mexico and Brazil because the Samsung and LG, more than 200 Korean companies have their plants in Mexico and Brazil. But even to them, the English proficiency is more important than Spanish proficiency. And somehow we don't trust them much of the test result of Delhi. And Korean companies want to hire people who can speak English and Spanish in both languages, but they never want to hire people who only can speak Spanish. So I always ask my students, first learn English and then learn Spanish. If you only speak Spanish, there will be nowhere where you can get a job. And some global companies like Samsung and Hyundai in Korea, including myself, we don't trust the test result of the Delhi.
So, Professor Lee, we have questions in the chat box. I think it's from Zhou Yimi. Did you see the question in the chat box?
Some argue that CEFR is neutral and seem to serve as a reference framework for other languages. I wonder what your thoughts are on this. Well, in Europe, English cannot be lingua franca. I mean, the equality between countries which joined the European Union is very important. So, German has the same value as French, as English, as other foreign languages spoken within European Union. And I don't know, somehow in my university and in other universities in Korea, we don't use Spanish textbook published in Spain. Textbook based on the concept of the CEFR guideline. Somehow, students feel uncomfortable learning Spanish using textbook based on the written following the CEFR guideline. I don't know why. I think because all Koreans are very used to American standard. And since, I don't know, American troops are present in Korea, we are so close to the United States, and we are so used to American culture and American education system. And even some college, high school students in Korea take SAT and AP tests for the entrance test, especially from the European department. They insist that we have to adopt the CEFR for our foreign language education, but many of them don't feel comfortable with the concept.
No, I think question is about whether CEFR is also applicable to other European languages like Spanish or Italian. So
That was my answer. I mean, it would be applicable, I think, but in Korea, it's not applicable in Korea.
okay. I think we have a similar situation here because we have some other foreign languages like Russian, Spanish, and Korean. And sometimes we call, other foreign languages as the second foreign language. Like, what do you do in Korea? It's interesting. We use the term like a second foreign language. So English is the first foreign language. But for when we refer to other foreign languages in Taiwan, we also use the term like a second foreign language. It's interesting. It's just the general trend of English as a lingua franca.
The SAT is very important in Korean life. So, and on CSAT, every student should take the English examination. They have to hand in the score of the English, but they don't need to take the examination of a second foreign language. It's optional. And my university never require the score of the second foreign languages. Only very few universities, I think in case of the universities of foreign languages, maybe require the submission of the score of the second foreign languages for the university entrance, I think.
So thank you very much, Professor Lee, and thank you for the participation of the audience. Thank you for giving us the insightful understanding about the foreign language education in Korean. Okay, so at the end of today, we have a panel discussion. We will have Professor Lee in the panel discussion. So now, thank you for the participation in this session and have a nice day. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'll join you soon on the panel discussion. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the panel discussion is going to begin. The panel discussion is hosted by Research Fellow Lin Qinglong from Research Center for Translation, Compilation, and Language Education at National Academy for Educational Research. Now we solemnly introduce the panelists in order of the sessions. Professor Tono from Graduate School of Global Studies at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. Vice Rector Wen from Hui University of Foreign Languages and International Studies. Assistant Professor Savsky from Department of Foreign Languages at Prince of Songkla University. Professor and Director Lee from the Institute of Hispanic Studies, Korea University. Deputy CEO Ru Hui from the Language Training and Testing Center. Now we leave time to Research Fellow Lee.
好，大家好。我们从谈 CEFR 的在地实践，那在地实践以后，可以看看各国教育的情形。所以我们今天有3个主题。第一个主题是大家应该蛮有兴趣的，去了解一下，就是有关各个国家有关英语教学的现况。例如那个学生从哪一个年级开始学习及每周学习的时间，还有家长对小孩英语文学习的重视情况，还有教师教学及学生学习所遭遇的困难和挑战，这就是从经验来看。第二个主题是有关各国中小学英语文教学依据的能力标准是什么，那是在地化发展到导入国际语言能力的标准，那有曾经遭遇到哪些问题挑战，如何克服。那第3个主题是导入国际英语文能力标准对各国英语文教学学习评量重要性为何。另外一个是在 AI 时代将来可能进一步应用到哪些层面。所以就是主要是从早上4位讲者的讲去扩充，看大家交换一些相关的经验。那我们就先邀请副校长来谈这3个相关的主题。我们欢迎副校长。
Yes. So thank you for this panel discussion. I think that it's very interesting for me to listen to different presentations related to the CEFR from scholars around a different country, from different countries in Asia, including and I see there is a kind of very strong interest in the CEFR in the context of Asia and Southeast Asia. So related to the question raised in the discussion, there are 3 topics. I think I would like to provide some information related to the 3 questions that you have raised. In Vietnam, related to the first one, the first topic, the situation of English teaching in primary and secondary schools in Vietnam. I think we are moving towards making English becoming more and more important, and I hope that there will be more stronger policies to make English become the second language in the Vietnam teaching context, which means basically we are targeting using English as a language, as a medium of instruction in schools at all level. So that's the ambition. But right now, we allocate about 1,155 contact hours for 3 levels at the primary, lower secondary, upper secondary English language teachings. By the way, 1 contact hour is it is equivalent to about 45 to 50 minutes class hour. So in total, it's about more than 1,100 classroom hour for teaching English. We hope that the amount of teaching hour, contact hours in classroom will be increased, but due to the constraints of the curriculum, we cannot, allow more a higher amount of time for that, and this is what we call a new English curriculum in Vietnam. We call that the 2018 English language curriculum, where a lot of changes, a lot of reform has been made. And one of the things is we try to incorporate the can-do statements from the CEFR in describing the outcomes of these levels in terms of English proficiency. So the students are expected to reach a certain level. For example, for primary, it would be A1. For lower secondary students, it would be A2. And for high school, it would be B1. So that the expected outcomes. Before, we don't have that. Before the new curriculum, we don't have the expected outcome based on the CEFR can-do statements. That could be considered as one of the significant changes that we made in terms of curriculum design. And about the concern and the attention to the English language education in Vietnam, we see the attention and parental involvement, the involvement from parents in English language teaching. Parents in Vietnam generally believe that English, a better proficiency English will bring about more chances, more opportunities for well-paid jobs or good salary. So they invest a lot both in English, formal English language education in the classroom, as well as the informal tutoring in some language centers outside of the classroom. Do we have any difficulties and challenges in terms of teaching? Yes, in general, in Vietnam, the challenges for the teachers, there are many, but I think from my perspective, when carry out this CEFR-based proficiency outcomes, we have challenges in terms of materials, resources. So especially what we call CEFR-aligned materials. So it's easy for publisher to say this is a CEFR-aligned materials, but it's hard to validate that kind of claims. And maybe they suffer more challenges related to classroom size or professional development opportunities, especially in relation to the CEFR philosophy and the CEFR approaches towards teaching and assessment. For learners, I think the challenges for them is the lack of exposure. We consider this as one of the significant challenging obstacles for learners in EFL setting like Vietnam, because basically they don't have the chances to practice English in an authentic environment. So the lack of exposure to the language is one of the greatest barriers towards higher proficiencies in English language. So those are some of the initial thoughts of the first topic. I hope that I can give right now. I don't know if I have to stop and wait for other people to share or not.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, well, I mean, in general, the principle in Thailand is that there is an overwhelming focus on English in language education in general. It's interesting hearing the number of hours that were just mentioned from Japan and Vietnam. In Thailand, it used to be 1 hour period starting from primary grade 1. This was upgraded to 5 hours per week for grades 1 to 3 at some point in the last, I think, eight or so years. At least that's the most recent information I have. I don't know whether that's been pulled back or not. It was at that time quite a great pressure, of course, on the teaching staff because there is already a kind of lack. But that sort of, let's say, underlines the discourse around English in Thailand, which is very much one of, you can call it English fever. Yeah, that everyone must have English as much as possible. The hours do then drop, but the English remains, as I said in my presentation, compulsory even through tertiary level. So even at, for example, at my university, when the students come in, they will have to take a certain number of hours per week in the first and second year of English. Yeah. And of course, then this is only now at some universities, the system is changing where English is becoming fully elective. Yeah. But those are, I think the only university I know is one of the bigger universities in Bangkok, where I guess the perception is that they can afford to make it elective because the students already come in with quite a high proficiency. Yeah. Aside from that, another area where you can really see this happening or the importance of English growing is, and I briefly touch upon this in the presentation, but it's worth explaining a bit more, is the spread of CLIL, so content language integrated learning, and English medium instruction, especially at secondary and even at primary level. If you have enough money, basically, you can now choose, I'm pretty sure in most regions of Thailand, some kind of degree of bilingual education. My daughter, for example, goes to a bilingual school, but of course, in her case, she uses English and Thai at home, so that's perfect for her. Most of her classmates don't. So, of course, for them, they are getting an education in 2 languages, one of which they only use at school. And that's already, and this is still pre-primary level, yeah. But that is spreading. It used to be, at the very beginning, English medium instruction was very much just a elite phenomenon only for the very wealthiest. It's really now becoming accessible where even public schools or sort of private schools are opening English medium programs for additional cost, of course, in sort of non-elite areas. Hat Yai, for example, would be a place like that. We're not a a relatively big city, but not one of those affluent, globalized cities like Bangkok or Phuket or Chiang Mai. Yeah. So, but even here, there are several international schools, several public or other type of schools that are offering English medium programs. And of course, in this is where, parental expectations come in, since you ask about that, which is clearly right. People are seeing, parents are seeing kind of sense in sacrificing quite a great amount of their income for their children's English education. Yeah. And of course, here we also get into shadow education, so tutoring. That's also very, very much important now in the Thai education scene. Indeed, I could say that out of our undergraduate students at Faculty of Liberal Arts, probably more of them who end up in teaching desire to be, let's say, entrepreneurial teachers who have their own micro language school rather than working at a school, traditionally as, a government school or even a private school as traditional teachers. Of course, what difficulties? Well, the difficulty seems to be that it doesn't work. In the end, that if the majority of universities cannot achieve anywhere near the goal that was set for university graduation, which is B1 in English, then it tells you that all of these hours, all of these resources that are being pulled into English aren't really working. And as I said in my presentation, there are practical issues with this. Large classes, that is, I think we're still underestimating. Having experience teaching in, English conversation classes for 50 students, for example, I think we still underestimate just what an impact that has on what we can actually do and the kind of environment that it creates in the classroom. But beyond that, I think, it's in the end a sociolinguistic issue that simply English is not present enough in the context to justify the goals that are being set. From a European perspective, in Slovenia, I forget what it is, but it's 60 or 70% of people say that they are fluent in English. But we are fluent in English because all of our TV or most of our TV is in English, because English for us is a language of mobility. Slovenian is a language of 1.8 million speakers, which you cannot use as a lingua franca with barely anyone. There is a quite great demand, and culturally the context is quite different in Thailand. So let's say the end result is big extremes. You might have extremely proficient students coming out of bilingual education, usually because they have the resources to do that, but you might have very low proficiency students who come out of many, many hours of English, but basically come to university and start again from A1. What is your name? What is your favorite color? And that kind of thing, which, as a reflection must be incredibly frustrating for them as an experience. So that is kind of just to give a general picture.
Thank you, Professor Savsky. Please welcome Professor Lee from Korea.
Hello. Yes, first question. Briefly describe the current situation of English language teaching in primary and secondary schools in your country. Teaching English in primary and secondary school in Korea is so important because English is the international language and is lingua franca. Korean economy depends so much on their exportation. If we cannot export, our country will collapse. So the English education is so important. It's the essential. Many people think it's the essential part of the education. So the problem is rich people who have money, they send their children to the kindergarten where teachers are native English speakers, and the tuition is extremely high, and they begin bilingual educations during their early age. So we call it English divide. If you have money, you can send your children to English kindergarten, and you can start bilingual English education since you are a kid. But if you don't have money, you cannot do that, and the proficiency, they will have low proficiency of English. So in case of primary school in Korea, in primary schools in Korea, English education officially starts from the 3rd grade. But many Koreans see that the English education offered in the primary school is not enough. So many Koreans send their children to the private academy called Hagwon, making their children learn English. So people like me who receive the traditional English education, we don't have native English accent. But the younger students nowadays, if I go to the West, so many students have excellent English skills. And in middle school and high school, they still learn English, and still they prepare the TOEFL to get the admission from the top universities. Even they study for the AP, and even some students study for the SAT to get admission of the international studies of the top universities. So English education is so important, but the problem is it costs a lot of money. It depends only on their social class. Second question, what are the proficiency standards based on for English language teaching in your country? Proficiency standard. If you want to get the job, you want to work in the global countries, global companies like Samsung or LG or Hyundai, your proficiency of English should be excellent. They already require the high proficiency of English because they are global countries. So in Korea, there is no in between. You have to speak excellent English. If not, you cannot work in global companies. And are they developed locally or aligned with the international language proficiency standard? Well, yes, indeed, in Korea, we aligned with the international language proficiency standard, especially American standard. In Korea, ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and ETS, Education Teaching Service, their guidelines are so important, especially ETS, Education Teaching Service of United States, since they develop, administers, and scores of TOEFL and TOEIC, and since the scores of TOEFL, the submission of TOEFL scores and TOEIC scores are so important to get a better job. Yes, we align with the American language proficiency standard. What problems and challenges have been encountered? Yeah, social conflict. Many Koreans think it's not fair because the proficiency of English not depend on the personal training and personal discipline, but it depends on the family wealth. So it caused certain tension in Korea, and whenever we change the government, new president want to change the system, but every time they try to change the system, every time they fail. And another thing is that to offer the equal opportunities to learn English, Korean government offers guest English teacher program called the GETS. Many schools, particularly in rural areas, government send English native teachers through English teacher program to the rural areas. Make students from the rural area learn English. But many Koreans still think it's not enough. And private education, called 학원 in Korea, is the key to understand English education in Korea. Number 3, what is the importance of integrating international English language proficiency standard into English language teaching, learning, and searching in your country in the age of AI? I think I already answered the question. Of course, in the age of AI, now we are using AI skills to develop the language learning and to solve the problem that for family can learn English through program developed based on AI. So many people think AI can create personalized learning plans. And now many companies trying to develop AI tutoring system. And so many people now think AI can be used for equality, and many people can learn English by AI, but still we have to develop. We are in the early stage of developing this plan. And in my case, I learned Japanese. I began to start to learn Japanese using Duolingo. So every day I practice Japanese using AI-based app called Duolingo. So I think AI can be very useful learning foreign language. Yeah, this is the end of my discussion.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Let's welcome Deputy CEO Wu.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to share my reflections on the use of CEFR today. And based on my experience at the LTTC,
I'd like to discuss two key aspects from an institutional perspective, which I believe will address topic 3 of this panel. Here are the two aspects I'd like to focus on. First, the significance and impact of the CEFR on our institution's testing practices and research. And second, the applications of the CEFR in the context of AI advancement. All right, the first aspect, as we all know that the CEFR was introduced in Taiwan in 2005 when the Ministry of Education adopted to establish a common English standard, English proficiency standard. And the standards require students, teachers of English, and civil servants to meet specific CEFR levels through external English exams. And additionally, test providers like us were mandated to align their examination with the CEFR levels, ensuring consistency across the board. And the CEFR has been influential in Taiwan, as shown in the table. Recognized tests include international ones like TOEIC, IELTS, as well as the local tests like the GEPT from the LTTC. And this highlights the link between LTTC and CEFR. And at the LTTC, we place great importance on the policy requiring test alignment, which has indeed influenced the practices for our test, particularly the GEPT and BEST-STEP. Aligning with the CEFR has elevated the quality of our tests and expanded their recognition both locally and globally. Moreover, in recent years, AI has refined our scoring reporting practice and enable us to provide personalized CEFR-aligned feedback to learners. I will give you more details about the applications of AI shortly. Let me provide a brief introduction to the two tests I just mentioned, GEPT and BEST-STEP, both of which were developed by LTTC and have gained widespread recognition in Taiwan. As shown in this table, the GEPT was launched in year 2000 to support lifelong learning, while the BEST-STEP, introduced just last year, aligned with Taiwan's bilingual policy for higher education, and both tests are aligned with the CEFR. On test alignment, we have conducted extensive studies over the years to demonstrate the criterion validity of these two tests. In other words, we have used the CEFR as an external benchmark for comparison. Aligning with an international standard is crucial for local tests like the GEPT and BEST-STEP, as it may enhance their quality. And the picture here presents a list of our CEFR linking studies. Some of the studies were conducted by LTTC independently, and some were by our collaboration with international researchers. The efforts put into comparing our tests to the CEFR have also enhanced our research capability. You're welcome to check out the research report through the link I provided on the slide. Originally, the GEPT was aligned with our local curriculum during its development. However, through the CEFR GEPT alignment, the GEPT level can now also be interpreted in terms of the CEFR levels. The images here display the linkage between BEST-STEP scores and CEFR levels. The CEFR linking study for GEPT and BEST-STEP were conducted by following the methodologies and procedures recommended in a manual published by the Council of Europe. The procedures include familiarization, specification, standardization, and validations. And also, to enhance objectiveness, a twin panel approach was adopted involving judges from both internal and external research teams. This slide illustrates how we've leveraged the CEFR to help our stakeholders better understand and interpret our test scores. This is particularly useful for those who need to see, for example, how GEPT score corresponds to IELTS score or TOEFL scores in terms of CEFR levels. The information like this is greatly needed by those who are considering Taiwanese students' applications for admissions to foreign universities. All right, next, I'd like to focus on how we apply the CEFR in providing feedback to learners through the use of AI technologies. One example of this is Dr. GPT, an enhanced score reporting service we launched in 2021. After receiving their score reports, learners can scan the QR code to access the service, which provides their scores, the corresponding CEFR level, and individualized feedback designed to support self-directed learning. And this feedback is also aligned with CEFR levels, ensuring it is both relevant and actionable. Currently, Dr. GPT provides personalized feedback on listening and reading after learners complete the GPT test. However, with the launch of GPT iPrep later this year, the feedback will be expanded to cover speaking and writing as well. While Dr. GPT was developed entirely by LTTC, iPrep is a collaborative effort involving teams from linguistics, computer engineering, AI, and platform design, with strong support from government agencies backing Taiwan's bilingual policy. In summary, implementing the CEFR in a local context presents challenges, such as communicating with stakeholders and aligning with curriculum and assessment. However, by enhancing teachers' and learners' understanding of CEFR and making thoughtful adaptation, we may transform these challenges into opportunities, fostering a more effective and cohesive educational environment. Finally, the key is to use the CEFR or similar framework, CFRT, for example, as a tool to create a circular ecosystem that closely integrates learning, teaching, and assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will give some about the topic one. Okay, this is for the topic one. The weekly 1 hours for English language learning in our program guides or the 12-year basic education. For the elementary school, in the elementary we have 3 learning stages, and for the second learning stage, that's grade 3 and 4, 1 period per week. 1 period is about 40 minutes. About 40 is Taiwan. And in the third stage, that's grade 5 and 6, 2 periods per week. That's our curriculum map. And for junior high school is our 4th learning stage. That's grade 7 to 9. So 3 periods per week. That's for the junior high school. And for the senior high school, that's the fifth learning stage. So that's grade 10 to 12. So 18 required credits and 6 elective credits. So in high school, we use credits to describe the learning hours. And for the grades 10 and 11, that's 4 required credits per semester. That's about 4 periods per week. And grade 12, that's the first semester, that's 2 required credits. But we also have some adapted credits. So the current situation of English education in Taiwan, I think that's very similar to Japan, Korea, or Thailand, or Vietnam. According to the 12 years basic education curriculum, English class starts in the 3rd grade. As I show, that's the PPT. However, in 6 special municipalities, Keelung and Hsinchu, they now begin in post grade, say in grade 1. So a lot of countries that's started from the cities. The curriculum, along with the bilingual 2030 policy, aims to increase English instruction at the earlier stage, with more English medium teaching in public schools. So that's really against our English education. But despite this, over 60% of parents feel that school English classes are insufficient, and most arrange after-school English tutoring for their children. I think that's very similar for the monsoon Asia countries. All parents are pay very more attention to their children's English education. So according to the MOE, that's the Ministry of Education, nearly 203,000 students received the medial English education in the 2019 and the 2020 academic years. In 2020, 74% of junior high students score poorly in English. So that's different level. The MSET distribution showing a wide gap in English proficiency, listed in both urban and rural junior high schools, including Taipei. That means the two figures. Some is very excellent, but some users English still need to learn it. So that's the MSET situation. That's the difficult we face because the students' English proficiency is so different, and that will be challenging to teach or to compare textbook, because that's impossible for textbook to fit with two levels. So the gap persists in high schools, except for a few higher institutions. So that's the student English proficiency has MSET. So a survey funded by Educational Testing Service, ETS, and conducted by Sixin University, found that nearly 40% of parents are actively involved in their children's English education, with 42% starting English instruction before elementary school, and dedicated about 6.3 hours per week. Because the parents is pay attention to their children's education. So even they start to the elementary school, they start to learn English in kindergarten. The survey results also reflect parental anxiety. 64% of parents believe that schools' English education is insufficient. That's just what started from grade 3 and grade 4. Lots of parents believe that that's not learn English. And 65.2% of parents arrange for their children to attend tutoring or other school programs for English. I think that's the same for other countries. That parents pay more attention to their children's English education. And nearly 50% of parents think that learning English in this program is the most beneficial. They think the primary school or tutoring is more effective than in the school. And when asked about their expectation for their children's English learning, the most common response was internationalization and future employment and domestic higher education. I think that's all the same, the same tendency, like Japan or Korea, Ireland or that. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. And we leave time to Q&A. Any questions? Or the panelists that has questions, ask each other and ask. Okay, now first one. Given the challenges of applying the CEFR in a local context, what initial steps should be prioritized or successful implementation, whether at the national or classroom level? For example, should the focus on reducing class size or more community-ized teachers is the framework? Our panelists who will answer this question.
Can I say something?
Okay.
To respond to this question, I think that the CEFR, applying the CEFR in a local context, communicating with stakeholders is very important, of course. And we can identify stakeholders, including policymakers, teachers, and students, and parents. Since then, most of the panelists have mentioned how parents care about this students' learning. So I think the communication of with stakeholders is very important. For example, when in 2005, when the Ministry of Education decided to adopt CEFR, and of course this news struck parents. They were so anxious. They thought that the CEFR is another standardized test. So they called the LTTC, say, I want my kids to register for CEFR test. And we said, no, CEFR is not a test. So I think it's very important to let the parents, if we think parents play a very important role in influencing our students' learning, learners' learning, then I think that we need to do something to communicate, to let parents know what is CEFR, what it can do, and what's the relationship between CEFR and their learning, and then also the testing. That's some of my points that I'd like to share. Thank you.
Thank you. To please hear all of you. And evening, so patients, my question concerns the issue of global English. As English expressed and evolves across different regions, naturally, many localized variants emerge. For second language learners, should we aim for one or two fixed standards, such as British or American accents? Or should we acknowledge the existence of various English variants and adopt a more open approach in terms of English native teacher hiring, methodology, and assessment? So, any answers? Okay, Dr. Gavesky.
Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting question, yeah. And I mean, I think that not only we should, but we have to nowadays. Yeah, the reality that we have in Asia is that we have very different types of English being used here. Let's say there is a movement, a kind of evolving scholarly movement now to try and articulate what kind of language teaching this would be. But there are a couple of sort of different bodies of literature, people looking at teaching English as an international language, people looking at global English as language teaching. Then there, let's say a couple of different focuses. The very basis for everything seems to be to teach awareness. And this is probably, we can really, I think, connect this to the CEFR in the sense that, CEFR is talking about plurilingual awareness. And that's probably where, in our case, plurilingualism would mean multiple Englishes. Yeah. But of course, CEFR itself doesn't talk about Englishes. Yeah. The CEFR vision is still very much about, I think, standard languages. Yeah, as the kind of target of learning, and that's probably the place where where our sort of interpretation there's a lot of pressure on us to reinterpret in some way. Yeah, so definitely, and of course, yes, I definitely agree with I think what Yiming is suggesting here, which is that we then have to also think about hiring policy. Yeah. This obsession with native speaker teachers, which often is connected really to financial interests. Yeah, that there are people who run schools who can make big profits off of advertising their programs as native speaker run. Yeah. And that's a big challenge for us. So I definitely think that there is a scope here for, a use of CEFR which goes with global Englishes or English as an international language in a compatible direction. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Savitsky. And Professor Lee, from your experience,
Yes, we used to have the traditional view about toward the English education, but in last 10 or 20 years, after the 21st century, we began to change our vision toward English education due to the free trade agreement within so many countries. So English education became so important, and we offered options for the college admission. Before, you don't only had to submit the SAT scores, but in last decade, after 21st century, students could choose the EPP between the submission of the SAT score for English or the submission of TOEFL score instead of English scores of CSAT. And it helps a lot the improvement of English skills of many Korean students. And they began to learn English under bilingual education circumstances. But however, as I told you before, in 2019, there was also political corruption, big, huge scandal. And then after that, Korean government banned the submission of TOEFL scores in the college admission process. But still, some universities like mine and Yonsei University still accept TOEFL scores just in case for the schools where all the classes are only taught in English. But the problem is we always in between two extremes. Traditional education based on the fairness and bilingual education based on the family welfare. So always there are two extremes. So if we put importance on the English proficiency skills, we have to put less importance on CSAT examination. It was a fact before, but after 2019, once again, the score of CSAT is important, and I think students now begin to put more importance on reading and listening instead of speaking and writing. So we are going backwards after 2019, after the political scandal. But it can be changed in the next government because in Korea, everything changes so quickly. We reform everything constantly in every 5 years, in every 3 years. So we Koreans don't like following the tradition. So who knows what will happen in 2 or 3 years or within 5 years. So English education policy is changing constantly, depend on the political situation in Korea. In Korea, education are related so much onto the political situation too.
Thank you, Professor Lee. And Deputy CEO, do you want to give some answers?
It's okay. We have another question.
Oh, another question. Okay. The question for the panelists: what do you think Taiwan needs to prioritize for their goal of bilingual nation by 2030? Based on the macro and the micro challenges faced in your countries, CEFR development, what recommendations do you have for Taiwan?
I want to, and I don't want anyone to take it the wrong way. I do want to put on record that I have issue with idea of bilingual policy to begin with, because I think every society is more than bilingual. But putting that aside, I think that in the end there are more languages than just 2 in any country that do matter. But putting that aside, I mean, if I could give advice to the whole country, I would say think of a way that this can be seen not as a goal, but maybe as an aspiration. Because the danger of setting that as a goal when it comes to English, is unless it's possible to achieve it, there is then a danger of going into this negative spiral where the results are never good enough, and the policy continues to there's this perceived failure, right? And there is this constant panic among all stakeholders, among politicians who think that they have to do something, and then you have this rapid succession of policies, parents who think that they have to find new that they need to do something extra, and more weekend classes, more of this, more of that. That there's a dangerous path to go there. Yeah. So that would maybe be that there's a narrative. If it's seen in the narrative as, okay, we aspire to this, right, and sort of we'll do what we can to try and go toward that direction, then that's fine. But going toward it as we must by this year have bilingualism, then you risk ending up in a situation where half of the people who graduate high school would be failure, or even more than half. Then that's a quite problematic narrative, because it means that, and this is going back to what Prof. Lee was saying in Korea, you end up with this deficit where you have, some who are constantly below what the expectation is. Maybe that would be so thinking about the narrative would be quite important from the perspective of what I see and also elsewhere in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I totally agree with the opinion of Professor Tabuski. That's the problem, not only in Korea. I think same thing happening in Japan and Taiwan and China. I think so.
Okay. Thank you, panelists. Yes. Next question from MEC. The question is, I don't mean to complicate the issue, but given the difficulties in implementing the CEFR, should we consider creating a simpler framework instead focus on English as a lingua franca, specifically for the Asia context, such as Pan-Asia ELF framework or something like that? Thank you. So our panelists will answer first.
It's a very interesting idea. I think it would involve, lots of complexities in even that we try to create an Asian Pacific, framework. And even the framework is developed, I think it's when you try to implement any framework in a context, it's complicated. And I know it's interesting since that, Professor Tono has developed CEFRJ, and I know the CEFRT project is going on in Taiwan is actually, relying on lots of experience from CEFRJ. So I guess that there will be lots of similarities and amount of between different, framework developed in different countries. So when there are more framework like this be developed, I think that we can continue discussing, how to collaborate or exchange. And then maybe in the future, there will be so-called a Pan-Asia framework. I don't know, but it takes time. But it's an interesting idea. Yeah, worthy for, looking into. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. You please be all who other panelists have any opinion or have any suggestions about these questions. Okay.
I would agree, that maybe creating a separate framework isn't the way to go. Like, my sense is doing a kind of companion guideline, how to implement CEFR and promote this, right? That's probably the way to go, because in the end it's just a question of, bridging the gap between what is in the CEFR and, for example, a curriculum developer who wants to promote, diversity through English, who wants to promote maybe also, a vision of pluriculturalism that suits kind of global citizenship in Asia, right? So having, maybe just a set of guidelines. It can be a very short document, just saying, when it says, this, right, this can mean, right, ABC, yeah, and and then just helping to interpret. Maybe that would be the way to go, and that's it's something that we don't need a huge multinational project to do. Yeah, it can be quite a localized thing that can be started somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor Savitsky. And I remember Professor Lee has some question to ask, right?
Yeah, but I can pass my questions. I just had a simple question. I want you to ask, what is the current situation of the education, second foreign language education? I mean, other than English. The Department of French and German and Russian are disappearing. Probably same thing is happening in Taiwan and Japan and in Vietnam. I don't know. I just had a simple question about that.
Thank you, Professor Lee. And how about Thailand, Professor Savitsky?
Yeah, well, definitely there's been this overall push toward English. Yeah, so the other languages are kind of marginalized to some extent. Actually, the curriculum at the moment actually doesn't say English specifically; it says foreign languages. But then, in reality, almost all of that would be devoted to English. There are, I would argue that culturally, probably Korean and Japanese and Chinese are actually probably more, authentic as languages to focus on, because of K-pop, because of the cultural influence. In the end, there's a lot of potential there, and a lot of kind of let's say self-directed or whatever out of classroom learning, that kind of thing. But that's still on let's say, at an early stage. From the south of Thailand perspective, big surprise here is that there is very little interest in learning Malay, learning Indonesian. Considering that we're just across the border, that we have Malay-speaking community in southern Thailand, that's a very marginalized community. So there's still, I guess, maybe a lack of kind of, if we're talking about ASEAN as a community, and there's not really this emerging idea yet of we should learn each other's languages. Yeah. And that's still a long way to go to that, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Professor Savitsky. And the future CEO, we want to...
Okay, yeah, the situation in Taiwan, second foreign language teaching education actually has been increasingly emphasized and encouraged by the Ministry of Education at the secondary school level. And even we developed a second foreign language proficiency test, and the scores are also mapped with the CEFR levels. So CEFR levels are used not only for English, but also for second foreign language. And not only for second foreign language, in Taiwan, we also use CEFR to define the language for ability for local language, our L1s, including our Taiwanese dialect and Hakka, and even our Mandarin Chinese test. And all of these tests are, aligned with the CEFR. Thank you.
Okay, the time for this section. So ladies and gentlemen, as we bring this discussion to a close, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our honorable panelists and all participants for their thoughtful contributions. Today, we have had the opportunity to dive into key issues surrounding the development of English proficiency standards in the monsoon Asia region, experience challenge and forward-looking strategies. The insight provided by our speaker from Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea, and Taiwan have given us a very valuable perspective and how to adapt and implement these standards to suit the local context while relying on global frameworks like the CEFR. We have also touched on the potential role of AI and the emerging technology in the future of English education, opening up exciting possibilities for further innovation. And I believe the knowledge shared today will help drive progress in our collective effort to improve English education across the region. Moving forward, it's clear that collaboration and continued dialogue will be the key to overcoming challenges and advancing our goals. Thank you all once again for your participation. As we move forward, I encourage continued collaboration and dialogue. Together, we can advance English education with our region, ensuring that our students are prepared for the global future. So, thank you again. Thank you. And see all you next time, maybe next year. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.